2 years ago, I found out that my best friend had taken the man I loved most, my husband, and shattered the life I thought we'd built together. I remember sitting in my darkened Brooklyn apartment, clutching the invitation she'd sent me to their wedding, the ink smudged from my trembling hands. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. I never imagined I'd be someone telling this story. At 64 years old, I thought I'd earned the right to quiet sunsets and grandchildren's laughter. Instead, I found myself holding a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering that might as well have been a death sentence for my sanity. The return address was written in Maria's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting that had penned birthday cards, grocery lists, and secret notes about surprise parties for my own children. That morning, I was wearing my old navy blue housecoat, the one with coffee stains near the pocket and a small tear by the hem. My gray hair was pulled back in the same messy bun I'd worn for the past 2 years, since everything fell apart. The October light filtered through my small apartment windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor my ex-husband and I had installed together 15 years ago. Everything in this place held memories. The scratched dining table where we'd eaten thousands of meals. The faded couch where we'd watched our daughters grow up. The bookshelf holding photo albums I couldn't bring myself to open anymore. But that invitation changed everything. I set it on the kitchen counter next to my morning coffee, black now, because I'd stopped buying cream to save money, and stared at it for what felt like hours. Maria Rodriguez and David Chen request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. David Chen. My David. The man who'd promised to love me until death do us part 26 years ago in a small church in Queens. Maria Rodriguez. My best friend since our daughters started kindergarten together. The woman who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who'd celebrated every promotion at my job at the downtown insurance office, who'd helped me pick out the burgundy dress I wore to my own daughter's wedding just 3 years ago. The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Heavier than it should have. Inside, the invitation was printed on thick cardstock with elegant fonts. There was even a small photo of them, David, my David, with his arm around Maria's shoulders. Both of them smiling. Both of them looking happier than I'd seen either of them in years. I dropped the invitation. It fluttered to the floor like a dying bird. That's when I knew I had to tell someone this story. Because maybe, somewhere out there, someone else is holding an invitation that cuts like a knife. Maybe someone else is wondering how 30 years of friendship and 26 years of marriage could disappear so completely that the people who destroyed your life would invite you to celebrate their happiness. My apartment smells different now than it used to. When David lived here, it smelled like his aftershave and the coffee he made too strong every morning. When Maria used to visit, which she did almost daily for nearly 2 decades, it smelled like her vanilla perfume and the cigarettes she thought she'd hidden from me. Now it smells like the lavender candles I burn to mask the loneliness, and sometimes like the Chinese takeout I order because cooking for one person feels pointless. The walls are covered with family photos that tell a story I'm still trying to understand. There's one of Maria and me at Coney Island with all 4 of our children, her 2 sons and my 2 daughters, building sandcastles and laughing at something I can't remember anymore. We're both younger there, maybe in our 40s, wearing matching sun hats we'd bought at a street vendor's stall. Our kids are covered in sand and ice cream, and David is in the background, grilling hot dogs and waving at the camera. There's another photo from Christmas 3 years ago. David is carving the turkey, Maria is helping my youngest daughter set the table, and I'm in the kitchen doorway, smiling and holding a bottle of wine. We look like family. We were family, or so I thought. But there are gaps now where other photos used to be. I took down the ones that hurt too much to see. The couple's vacation photos from our trip to Niagara Falls. The New Year's Eve pictures where David and I are kissing at midnight while Maria and her then-husband Miguel are laughing in the background. The impossible-to-explain photos of backyard barbecues and birthday parties where everyone looks so genuinely happy. I keep asking myself when it started. When did the woman who knew every detail of my life, who knew that I take 2 sugars in my coffee and that I worry about money even when I don't need to, when did she decide that my husband was something she could take? The invitation had a little note attached. In Maria's handwriting, it said, "Helen, I know this is complicated, but our friendship means too much to me to not invite you. I hope you'll consider coming. Love always, Maria. Love always." I laughed out loud when I read that. A bitter, hollow laugh that echoed in my empty apartment. Love always. The same words she'd written in birthday cards and Christmas notes for 20 years. The same words that apparently meant nothing when she decided my marriage was something she wanted more than my friendship. That first day, I couldn't stop reading the invitation. I must have picked it up and put it down 50 times. Each time, I noticed something new that hurt. The date, a Saturday in November that happened to be the anniversary of the day David and I bought this apartment. The location, St. Patrick's Cathedral, where David and I had talked about renewing our vows for our 25th anniversary. The reception venue, the same hotel where we'd celebrated our daughter Sarah's engagement party. Every detail felt intentional. Every detail felt like another small knife being twisted in a wound that was already bleeding. I called in sick to work that day. At 64, I was still working full-time at Metropolitan Insurance, handling claims and trying to save enough money to retire with some dignity. David's construction business had failed during the recession, and we'd burned through most of our savings keeping the family afloat. I'd been the steady paycheck for the last 8 years of our marriage, and now I was the steady paycheck for just myself. My supervisor, Janet, didn't ask questions. She'd known me for 12 years, and I'd never called in sick unless I was genuinely ill. But I wasn't physically sick that day. I was soul sick. Heart sick. I was the kind of sick that doesn't go away with medicine or sleep. I spent the day on my couch, still in that old navy blue housecoat, holding the invitation and trying to remember when everything started falling apart. Let me take you back to where it really began. 2.5 years ago, on a Thursday evening in March. I was making dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce, David's favorite, when he walked through the door looking different. Not different in an obvious way. He was still wearing his work clothes, still had paint under his fingernails from the renovation job he'd been working on in Manhattan. But something in his eyes had shifted. "How was your day?" I asked, the same question I'd asked almost every day for 26 years. "Fine," he said. But he didn't ask about mine. He used to always ask about mine. He went straight to the shower instead of giving me his usual kiss on the cheek. I stood in the kitchen, stirring the sauce, feeling a small knot form in my stomach. I told myself I was imagining things. Marriage has ups and downs. People get tired. People get distracted. I'd been through this before with David, especially during the years when his business was struggling. But this felt different. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing the small changes. David's phone faces down on the table at dinner. David taking calls in the other room. David suddenly very interested in going to Maria's house to help her fix things, her leaky faucet, her broken porch step, her squeaky garage door. "Miguel should be fixing those things," I said one evening when David announced he was going over to help her install a new ceiling fan. "Miguel works double shifts at the hospital," David replied. "He doesn't have time for home repairs." "I'm just being a good friend." A good friend? At the time, I thought that's exactly what he was being. Maria's husband Miguel was an ER nurse at Brooklyn Methodist, and he often worked 16-hour shifts. Maria had been struggling to maintain their house since her mother had moved in with them the year before. Her mother, Mrs. Santos, had dementia and needed constant care. I'd helped Maria research care facilities and navigate Medicare paperwork. I'd brought casseroles when she was too tired to cook and had spent countless evenings sitting with Mrs. Santos so Maria could run errands. That's what friends do. That's what family does. So when David offered to help with household repairs, it seemed natural. Neighborly. The kind of thing that made me proud to be married to a man who would look out for a friend in need. I should have seen the signs. But when you trust someone completely, when you trust someone's completely, you don't look for signs. You don't catalog glances or measure the length of conversations or notice when laughter becomes a little too intimate. Maria and I were still talking every day then. She'd call me at work during my lunch break to complain about her mother's doctors or to ask for advice about her teenage sons. She'd still come over for coffee on Saturday mornings, sitting at my kitchen table in her favorite spot by the window, talking about everything and nothing. But there were small changes there too. Changes I explained away because I loved her. She stopped bringing her famous blueberry muffins when she visited. She'd been making those muffins for our Saturday morning coffee dates for 15 years, but suddenly she was always too busy or too tired to bake. When I asked about it, she shrugged and said she was trying to cut back on sugar. She stopped asking about David. For 20 years, our conversations had been full of casual references to our spouses. Miguel said the funniest thing yesterday. David helped his brother move last weekend. Miguel's working Christmas Day, can you believe it? But suddenly, David's name disappeared from our conversations completely. And she started mentioning money differently. Maria had always been careful with money, more careful than I was, honestly. But she started talking about investments and savings accounts and retirement planning in ways she never had before. She mentioned looking into getting her real estate license. She talked about maybe taking a vacation somewhere warm that winter. "Miguel must be getting some overtime pay," I said during one of these conversations. "Something like that," Maria replied, but she didn't elaborate. I didn't push. Friends respect boundaries. Friends don't pry when someone doesn't want to talk about their finances. I told myself she was probably just being responsible, maybe they'd gotten a tax refund or a small inheritance. But the changes kept coming. David started coming home later from his repair jobs at Maria's house. What used to be 2-hour projects became all-day affairs. When I asked what was taking so long, he'd give detailed explanations about unexpected complications, water damage behind the walls, electrical problems that needed to be completely rewired, foundation issues that required consultation with specialists. Maybe Maria should hire professionals for some of this stuff, I suggested one evening after David came home covered in dust and paint at 9 o'clock. Professional contractors are expensive, David said. And besides, I like helping her. She's been through a lot with her mother and everything. That was true. Mrs. Santos had good days and bad days, but the bad days were becoming more frequent. There were times when she didn't recognize Maria, times when she wandered out of the house in her nightgown, times when she became aggressive with the home health aide. Maria was exhausted, emotionally and physically. Miguel was working extra shifts to pay for medical expenses that insurance didn't cover. Their teenage sons were acting out at school, probably in response to all the stress at home. When I looked at the situation objectively, David's help made perfect sense. Maria needed support. David had construction skills and free time. I was proud of my husband for being the kind of man who would step up when friends needed help. But late at night, lying in bed next to David, I felt something I'd never felt before in our marriage. A small, persistent doubt that lived somewhere between my heart and my stomach. A feeling that something was shifting beneath my feet, like when you're walking on ice and you can't see the cracks forming underneath. I pushed that feeling down. I told myself I was being paranoid, maybe jealous in some irrational way. Maria and I had been best friends for 20 years. David and I had been married for 24 years at that point. We'd weathered financial difficulties, family stress, health scares, and all the normal challenges that come with building a life together. We were stronger than whatever temporary weirdness I was imagining. Have you ever had that feeling? That sense that something fundamental is changing, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is? You know something in your life, and you tell yourself you're being dramatic or oversensitive, but deep down, your instincts are screaming that something is wrong? I kept pushing that feeling away for months. Through David's increasingly frequent trips to Maria's house. Through Maria's increasingly distant behavior during our coffee dates. Through the gradual disappearance of couple dates, the four of us going out to dinner or to movies like we had for so many years. Miguel's been so tired lately, Maria would say when I suggested we all go see a show or try that new restaurant in Park Slope. We should give them some space, David would say when I proposed inviting them over for dinner. They've got a lot going on with Mrs. Santos. It all made sense. It was all perfectly logical. And maybe that's why it took me so long to see what was really happening. When you love someone, you want to believe their explanations. When you trust someone, you don't spend your energy looking for lies. But the truth has a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how deep you try to bury it. It was a Tuesday evening in October, almost 2 years ago now. David was at Maria's house again, supposedly helping her install new kitchen cabinets. He'd been there since morning, with a brief break to come home for lunch. I was making dinner, pork chops with mashed potatoes, and wondering if I should keep his plate warm or if he'd eat at Maria's house again. His phone was sitting on our dining room table. He'd forgotten it when he left that morning, which was unusual for David. He was practically attached to that phone, always checking baseball scores or construction job listings or messages from his brother in New Jersey. The phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then another. I'm not the kind of woman who goes through her husband's phone. In 24 years of marriage, I'd never felt the need to check his messages or emails. We'd always trusted each other completely. But something about the rapid succession of messages made me glance over. The screen lit up with preview text from someone named M. I can't wait to see you tonight. Miguel is working late again. I've been thinking about what you said earlier. My heart stopped. M could be anyone, I told myself. Maybe someone from a construction job. Maybe his friend Mike from the union. Maybe a client named Michelle or Margaret or Mark. But I knew. Somewhere in my bones, I knew. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The screen required a passcode, something that was new. David had never password protected his phone before. We'd always had an open phone policy in our house. Either of us could answer the other's phone, check the other's messages, use the other's device without asking permission. I tried our anniversary date. Incorrect passcode. I tried my birthday. Incorrect passcode. I tried David's birthday. Incorrect passcode. Then, with a sinking feeling in my stomach, I tried Maria's birthday. May 15th. The phone unlocked. What I found in that phone changed everything. Months of messages between David and Maria. Hundreds of them. Messages that started innocent enough, discussions about home repair projects and scheduling, but gradually became more intimate, more romantic, more sexual. Messages about how unhappy they both were in their marriages. Messages about how they'd always felt a connection but never acted on it. Messages about secret meetings and stolen moments and plans for a future together. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just an affair. This was two people who had decided they belonged together and were actively planning to leave their spouses to make that happen. The most recent messages were the worst. David telling Maria that he was going to ask me for a divorce after the holidays. Maria telling David that she was going to tell Miguel she wanted a separation. Plans for David to move into the spare bedroom in Maria's house, temporarily, until they could find a place of their own. Plans that involved my life savings. Plans that involved selling the apartment David and I owned together. Plans that involved splitting up our family and dividing our assets and breaking apart everything I thought was permanent in my life. And throughout all of it, both of them talking about me like I was an inconvenience. An obstacle. A problem to be solved rather than a person to be considered. Helen's going to be devastated, Maria had written in one message. I know, David had replied. But she'll understand eventually. She wants me to be happy. She wants me to be happy. I read that message over and over again, trying to make sense of it. As if my happiness was irrelevant. As if 24 years of marriage and building a life together could be dismissed with a casual assumption about what I might want. I sat on my living room couch, holding David's phone, reading message after message that detailed the complete betrayal of the two people I loved most in the world. Messages that made it clear this had been going on for months. Messages that made it clear they'd been planning this for months. Messages that made it clear they'd been lying to my face for months. The pork chops burned while I read. The smoke alarm went off, a shrill beeping that seemed to match the ringing in my ears. I turned off the stove, opened the windows, and sat back down with David's phone. There were photos too. Selfies of David and Maria together, looking happy in ways I hadn't seen either of them look in years. Photos taken in Maria's house, in her bedroom, in places where they clearly felt safe from discovery. Photos that showed me that when David was supposedly installing kitchen cabinets or fixing plumbing, he was actually building a completely different kind of life with someone else. I don't remember how long I sat there reading. It could have been an hour or 3 hours. Time seemed to stop as my understanding of reality completely reorganized itself. When David came home that evening, I was still sitting on the couch, still holding his phone. The burned pork chops were still in the pan, and the apartment still smelled like smoke and disappointment. Hey, babe, he said, kissing the top of my head like always. Sorry I'm so late. Those cabinets were more complicated than we thought. I held up his phone without saying anything. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything or try to explain it away. But something in my expression must have made it clear that denial was pointless. Helen. He started. Don't, I said. Just don't. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. David on the chair across from me, staring at his hands. Me on the couch, still holding the evidence of his betrayal. How long? I finally asked. It's not what it looks like. How long, David? 6 months, he said quietly. Maybe 7. 7 months. 7 months of coming home to me every day, sleeping in our bed every night, talking about our retirement plans and our daughter's futures and whether we should repaint the kitchen. 7 months of lying to my face while planning to leave me behind. And Maria? She's unhappy too, Helen. Things with Miguel haven't been good for a long time. Are you planning to leave me? David didn't answer right away. In that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. I didn't want it to happen this way, he finally said. What way did you want it to happen? I was going to talk to you after Christmas. I didn't want to ruin the holidays for the girls. The girls. Our daughters, Sarah and Jennifer, both adults now with families of their own, but still the girls, in David's mind. Still reasons to time major life changes around Christmas dinners and birthday parties. And you thought telling me in January would be better? I thought maybe you'd understand. Maybe you'd see that we've both been unhappy for a while now. Have we been unhappy, David? Because I thought we were just going through a rough patch. I thought we were dealing with normal middle-age marriage stuff. I thought we were still a team. We haven't been a team in years, Helen. That sentence hit me harder than all the text messages combined. Because maybe it was true. Maybe somewhere along the way, while I was focused on keeping our family together and our finances stable and our day-to-day life functioning, we had stopped being a team. But that didn't mean the answer was to find a new teammate without telling the old one that the game was over. That night, David slept in our guest room. I didn't ask him to. He just did, maybe because he couldn't face sleeping next to me after I'd discovered his secret. Or maybe because he was already practicing for the new life he'd planned without me. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a few hours, my entire understanding of my life had changed. The man I'd loved for more than half my adult life was planning to leave me. The woman I'd considered my sister was planning to take him. And somehow, they'd both convinced themselves that this was something I would understand and accept. But what kept me awake that night wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that I'd been living in a fantasy for months, maybe longer. While I'd been worried about normal relationship challenges, communication problems, financial stress, the usual wear and tear of a long marriage, David had been creating an entirely different relationship with someone else. While I'd been trying to support Maria through her mother's illness and her marriage problems, she'd been running to my husband for comfort in ways that crossed every line of friendship and decency. And I'd missed it all. Not because the signs weren't there, but because I'd trusted them so completely that I couldn't imagine they would betray me. The next morning, David and I had the conversation I'd been dreading since I was a young woman. The conversation about ending our marriage. About dividing up the life we'd built together. About telling our daughters that the stability they'd always known was disappearing. David was surprisingly businesslike about it. He'd clearly been thinking about the practical details for months. He wanted to sell the apartment and split the proceeds. He wanted to divide our retirement savings. He wanted joint custody of the family dog, as if Bella was just another asset to be allocated in a settlement. What about Maria's marriage? I asked at one point. She's going to talk to Miguel next week. And her mother? We'll figure it out. We? Maria and I. Maria and I. The same phrase I'd been using for 20 years to describe my best friend and me. Now it described my husband and the woman who'd helped him plan the destruction of my life. 2 days later, Maria called me. Helen, we need to talk. I think we do. She came to my apartment that Saturday morning, like she had almost every Saturday for 20 years. But instead of sitting in her usual spot by the kitchen window, she perched on the edge of the couch, fidgeting with her purse strap. I never meant for this to happen, she said. But it did happen. David and we've been friends for so long. And we were both going through difficult times. It just developed naturally. Naturally. I repeated the word, trying to understand how destroying 2 marriages could be described as natural. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Maria. I'm devastated. I'm confused. I'm heartbroken. But angry? I don't even know what angry means in this situation. I hope someday you can forgive me. For having an affair with my husband? Or for lying to me about it for 7 months? Or for making plans to break up our family while sitting at my kitchen table every Saturday morning, pretending to be my friend? All of it, she said quietly. I hope someday you can forgive all of it. I wanted to ask her so many questions. When did she first start thinking of David as more than a friend? When did she decide that my marriage was something she had a right to interfere with? When did she stop caring about the friendship that had been one of the most important relationships in my life? But I couldn't ask any of those questions because I already knew the answers wouldn't matter. Nothing she could say would explain how 2 people I loved could cause me such deliberate pain. I want you to know, Maria said as she was leaving, that David and we're not doing this to hurt you. We're doing this because we love each other. Those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive, Maria. You can love each other and still be hurting me. In fact, you're hurting me because you love each other. After she left, I called my daughter Sarah. Mom? Is everything okay? You sound weird. Your father and I are getting divorced. Silence on the other end of the line. Mom? He's been having an affair. With Maria. With Maria? Our Maria? Aunt Maria? That's what Sarah had called her since she was a little girl. Aunt Maria. The woman who'd made birthday cakes and helped with school projects and attended every graduation and recital and important milestone. The woman who was supposed to be family. I'm coming over, Sarah said. You don't need to, I'm coming over now. For the next several months, my life existed in a strange space between my old reality and whatever reality was coming next. David moved out of our apartment and into Maria's spare room. Miguel filed for divorce after Maria told him about the affair. The 4 of us, 2 couples who'd been friends for 20 years, became 2 couples in the process of destroying each other's lives. My daughters rallied around me in ways that made me proud and heartbroken at the same time. Sarah, who lived in New Jersey with her husband and 2 young children, started calling me every day. Jennifer, who was still single and working as a nurse in Manhattan, began stopping by my apartment several times a week with groceries and takeout and her fierce, protective love. I can't believe Aunt Maria did this to you, Jennifer said one evening as we sat on my couch, eating Chinese food and watching old movies. I can't believe Dad did this to you. People change, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. People don't just change, Mom. They make choices. And their choices have been horrible. My daughters wanted me to be angry. They wanted me to fight for the apartment and the savings and the retirement accounts. They wanted me to hire the meanest divorce lawyer in Brooklyn and take David for everything he was worth. But I wasn't angry. I was tired. Bone deep, soul deep tired in ways I'd never experienced before. I felt like I'd been running a marathon that I didn't know I'd entered, and now that it was over, I could barely stand up. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick. David wanted out of our marriage quickly, and I didn't have the energy to fight him on details. We split everything more or less equally. I kept the apartment because I was the one with steady employment and could qualify for the mortgage on my own. David took half of our retirement savings and a small settlement. Neither of us fought about much. What was the point? The life we'd built together was already destroyed. Arguing about money wasn't going to rebuild it. But while our divorce was being finalized, David and Maria were planning their wedding. I found out about their engagement from a mutual friend who thought I already knew. "I'm so happy for Maria," she said at a church function we both attended. "She deserves some happiness after everything she's been through with her mother and the divorce." "Engagement?" I said. "Oh my God, she didn't tell you? David proposed last week. They're planning a winter wedding." A winter wedding. Less than 6 months after my divorce was finalized. Less than a year after they'd destroyed 2 marriages to be together. I went home that day and called Maria for the first time since our conversation about forgiveness. "Helen, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about you so much. I heard about your engagement." Silence. "I was going to call you," she said finally. "I wanted you to hear it from me." "When's the wedding?" "November. Nothing big. Just family and a few close friends." "Am I invited to this wedding, Maria?" Another silence. I don't know. I mean, I'd love to have you there, but I wasn't sure if that would be too painful for you." "It would be excruciating for me." "Then maybe, but I'd like to be invited anyway." I don't know why I said that. Even as the words were coming out of my mouth, I wasn't sure what I meant by them. Did I want to watch the man I'd loved for 26 years marry the woman who'd been my best friend for 20? Did I want to sit in a church and pretend to celebrate a union that had cost me my marriage and my closest friendship? Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I was strong enough to handle it. Maybe I wanted to show them that they hadn't completely destroyed me. Maybe I was just curious to see how they would handle the awkwardness of having the ex-wife at their wedding. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. "I'm not sure about anything anymore. But yes, I'd like to be invited." 3 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering, formal and elegant. "Maria Rodriguez and David Chen request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony on Saturday, November 14th, at St. Patrick's Cathedral." St. Patrick's Cathedral. The same church where David and I had talked about renewing our vows. The same church where we'd attended midnight mass every Christmas Eve for 25 years. The reception was at the Plaza Hotel. The same hotel where we'd celebrated our 25th anniversary just 2 years earlier, before everything fell apart. Every detail felt like a deliberate choice to incorporate pieces of the life David and I had shared. As if they weren't just getting married, but were actively replacing me in the specific version of happiness I'd thought was uniquely ours. But the note attached to the invitation made everything even more surreal. In Maria's handwriting, "Helen, I know this is complicated, but our friendship means too much to me to not invite you. I hope you'll consider coming. Love always, Maria. Love always." I read that note over and over, trying to understand the mental gymnastics required to write those words. How do you tell someone you love them after destroying their life? How do you claim that a friendship means too much to you when you've spent months lying to that friend and planning to steal their husband? But the most maddening part was that I believed she meant it. Maria wasn't evil. She wasn't a sociopath or a master manipulator. She was a flawed, complicated person who'd made terrible choices that hurt people she claimed to love. People often are capable of holding contradictory feelings at the same time. She could genuinely love me as a friend and still choose to pursue a relationship with my husband. She could be devastated about hurting me and still prioritize her own happiness over my well-being. That's what made the betrayal so much worse than it would have been if she'd simply been a villain. Villains are easy to hate. It's much harder to process pain caused by someone who hurt you while genuinely caring about you. For weeks after receiving the invitation, I couldn't decide whether to attend the wedding or not. My daughters were horrified by the idea. "Mom, you cannot go to that wedding," Sarah said during one of our daily phone calls. "It's insane. It's self-torture." "Maybe I need to see it," I replied. "Maybe I need to witness the end of this chapter of my life in order to close it properly." The chapter ended when they decided to have an affair. "You don't need to watch them celebrate it." Jennifer was even more direct. "If you go to that wedding, I'm staging an intervention. You've been through enough. You don't need to put yourself through more." But my neighbor Mrs. Henderson had a different perspective. Mrs. Henderson was 81 years old, a retired school principal who'd been widowed for 15 years. She'd become my unofficial advisor during the divorce, offering quiet wisdom and homemade soup during my lowest moments. "What does your heart tell you to do?" she asked one afternoon as we sat in her apartment, drinking tea and watching the snow fall outside. "My heart doesn't know what to do. My heart is confused." Confusion isn't the same as not knowing. Sometimes we know exactly what we want to do, but we're afraid of our own choices. "What would you do?" "I might go to that wedding," Mrs. Henderson said. "Not to punish myself or to make a scene or to try to win anyone back, but to prove to myself that I survived. To see with my own eyes that the people who hurt me are just regular people, not monsters or gods or anything more powerful than what they actually are. And what if it's terrible? What if it breaks me? Then you'll put yourself back together afterward, the same way you've been doing for the past year. But what if it doesn't break you? What if seeing them as just two people getting married, instead of the villains who destroyed your life, actually helps you heal? Mrs. Henderson's words stayed with me for weeks. Maybe attending the wedding wouldn't be about them at all. Maybe it would be about me proving to myself that I was stronger than the worst thing that had ever happened to me. The night before the wedding, I went to my bank and withdrew $5,000 in cash. It was money from the settlement I'd received in the divorce, money that was supposed to help me start my new life as a single woman. I put the cash in an envelope and wrote Maria's name on it in careful cursive. My wedding gift. Not because I wanted to celebrate their marriage, but because I wanted to demonstrate something to myself about who I chose to be in the face of betrayal. I could be bitter and vindictive, and honestly, part of me wanted to be, or I could be gracious and generous even when I'd been treated with neither grace nor generosity. The morning of the wedding, I put on the same burgundy dress I'd worn to my daughter's engagement party 3 years earlier. I did my hair and makeup carefully, not to outshine the bride or to win back my ex-husband, but to show up as the best version of myself. To prove that they hadn't diminished me. St. Patrick's Cathedral was exactly as beautiful as I remembered. The same soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that had made me feel close to God during all those Christmas Eve masses. The same stone floors where David and I had walked together, holding hands and feeling grateful for our life together. I arrived early and chose a seat in the middle of the church, not hidden in the back but not prominently displayed in the front. Close enough to witness everything, far enough away to maintain some emotional distance. As guests began to fill the church, I recognized many faces. Maria's family from Puerto Rico, some of whom I'd known for 20 years. David's brother and sister-in-law from New Jersey. Mutual friends from our old life, people who'd had to choose sides during the divorce and had mostly chosen to stay out of it entirely. A few people nodded at me politely. A few others looked surprised to see me there. Most avoided eye contact entirely, probably unsure of the etiquette for acknowledging the ex-wife at their friend's wedding. When Maria walked down the aisle, she was legitimately beautiful. She wore a simple white dress with long sleeves and a short train. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. She carried white roses and baby's breath, the same flowers I'd carried at my own wedding 26 years earlier. She saw me as she passed my row. Our eyes met for just a moment, and she gave me a small, nervous smile. I nodded back, not smiling, but not glaring either. Just acknowledging that I was there, that I'd kept my promise to witness this moment. David was waiting at the altar in a black tuxedo. He looked handsome and nervous and happy. Genuinely happy in ways I hadn't seen him look in years. Part of me hated that happiness, wanted to resent him for finding joy in something that had caused me so much pain. But part of me, a part one didn't expect to exist, was glad to see him happy again. Maybe that's what love really means. Not just caring about someone when their happiness aligns with yours, but wanting good things for them even when those good things exclude you entirely. The ceremony was traditional and brief. Maria and David exchanged vows they'd written themselves. They talked about finding love when they'd least expected it, about building a life together despite difficult circumstances, about being grateful for second chances. They didn't mention their first marriages. They didn't acknowledge the pain they'd caused or the lives they'd disrupted in order to be standing at that altar together. Their vows existed in a bubble where their love story began when they found each other, not when they decided to leave other people in order to be together. I understood why they'd framed their story that way. Acknowledging the destruction they'd caused wouldn't have made for beautiful wedding vows. But sitting in that church, listening to them talk about their love as if it were pure and uncomplicated, I felt the full weight of being erased from a narrative I'd been central to for more than half my life. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," David lifted Maria's veil and kissed her gently. The congregation applauded. Rice and flower petals rained down as they walked back up the aisle as husband and wife. Maria caught my eye again as they passed my row. This time, her smile was broader, more confident. She was married now. She'd gotten everything she'd wanted. The awkwardness of having me there was almost over. At the reception, I sat at a table with some of Maria's cousins I'd met over the years but didn't know well. They were polite and inclusive, asking about my daughters and my job and my plans for retirement. They didn't mention the divorce or the complicated circumstances of the wedding. We talked about normal things, the weather, recent movies, neighborhood changes, grandchildren. It was surprisingly pleasant. For long stretches of time, I almost forgot why I was there. David and Maria had their first dance to "At Last" by Etta James. The same song David and I had danced to at Sarah's wedding 2 years earlier. I watched them move together on the dance floor, looking comfortable and in love, and I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not relief that they were married, but relief that the chapter of my life that included both of them was officially closed. Relief that I no longer had to wonder what would happen next, because what happened next had already happened. Relief that the worst part was over. During dinner, I took the envelope with the cash out of my purse. $5,000 was a generous gift, more generous than anything they deserved from me. But it wasn't really for them. It was for me. A symbol of choosing grace over bitterness, forgiveness over revenge, healing over holding on to pain. I walked to the head table where Maria and David were sitting with their immediate family members. "Congratulations," I said, placing the envelope in front of Maria. She opened it and saw the money. Her face went pale. "Helen, I can't accept this. It's a wedding gift. You're supposed to accept wedding gifts. But this is too much. And under the circumstances? The circumstances are that you're starting a new life together, and new lives are expensive. Consider it my contribution to your happiness." David stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Or maybe like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Because I can," I replied. "Because I have the choice to respond to what happened between us with generosity instead of anger, and I choose generosity." I turned and walked away before either of them could respond further. On the taxi ride home from the reception, I thought about what Mrs. Henderson had said about proving to myself that I'd survived. She'd been right. Seeing Maria and David as a married couple, watching them navigate their wedding day like any other couple in love, had somehow made them less powerful in my mind. They weren't the villains who destroyed my life. They were just two flawed people who'd made choices that hurt me while pursuing something they wanted more than they wanted to protect my feelings. That realization didn't make what they'd done okay. But it made them human-sized instead of monster-sized, and that made the pain they'd caused human-sized too. Something I could carry without being crushed by it. But the real transformation was still to come. The Monday after the wedding, I woke up in my apartment and realized I had no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. For 26 years, my identity had been built around being David's wife. For 20 years, a significant part of my social life had revolved around my friendship with Maria. Now both of those relationships were gone, and I was left with the question of who I was when I wasn't defined by my connection to other people. I was 64 years old. I had a job I tolerated but didn't love, processing insurance claims for Metropolitan Insurance. I had enough money to support myself modestly but not lavishly. I had 2 adult daughters who loved me but had their own lives to focus on. I had a neighbor who'd become a friend during my darkest period. What I didn't have was a sense of purpose or passion or direction for the decades of life I had left. That realization should have been depressing. Instead, it felt like freedom. For the first time since I was a teenager, I could make choices about my life based entirely on what I wanted, without considering anyone else's needs or preferences. I could eat dinner at times that made sense for my schedule. I could watch television shows David had never liked. I could decorate my apartment according to my own taste instead of compromising with someone else's vision. I could also make bigger changes. I could quit my job and find work that felt more meaningful. I could travel to places I'd always wanted to see. I could take classes or learn new skills or explore interests I'd put aside during the decades when most of my energy went toward maintaining a marriage and raising children. The possibilities were overwhelming and exciting at the same time. I started small. I bought a small easel and some acrylic paints and set up a tiny art studio in the corner of my living room. I hadn't painted since high school, but I remembered loving it. The focus it required, the way problems could be solved through color and texture instead of words. My first painting was terrible. A lopsided landscape that looked like a child's drawing of mountains and trees. But the process of creating it was meditative and satisfying in ways I'd forgotten were possible. I painted every evening after work for weeks. Gradually, my technique improved. The mountains became more realistic. The colors became more sophisticated. I started experimenting with abstract designs and portraits. But more importantly, I started looking forward to something again. Every day at the insurance office, I found myself anticipating the moment when I could come home, put on old clothes, and disappear into the world of paint and canvas. After 3 months of painting as a hobby, I signed up for an art class at the community college near my apartment. The teacher was a professor named Robert Martinez who'd taken early retirement from Columbia University to focus on his own art and teach part-time. "You have good instincts," he told me after reviewing my portfolio during the first week of class. "Have you considered this as more than a hobby?" I hadn't. But his question planted a seed. The other students in the class were a mix of ages and backgrounds. There was Susan, a retired librarian who'd always dreamed of learning to paint. There was Michael, a 30-something graphic designer who wanted to work in more traditional media. There was Joyce, a grandmother who'd decided to pursue art after her husband died. We were all there for different reasons, but we shared a commitment to creating something beautiful and personal. For 2 hours every Tuesday and Thursday evening, we existed in a world where the only thing that mattered was translating our vision onto canvas. It was the happiest I'd been in years. Through the art class, I met Angela Rodriguez, no relation to Maria, despite the shared last name. Angela was a 58-year-old woman who'd moved to New York from Arizona after her own divorce 2 years earlier. She was funny and outspoken and completely uninterested in dwelling on the pain of her past. "We can sit around feeling sorry for ourselves," she said over coffee after class one evening, "or we can figure out how to make the next chapter better than the last one." Angela became my first new friend in decades. Not someone I'd known since our children were young, not someone connected to my old life with David. A friend I'd chosen as the person I was becoming, not the person I used to be. We went to museums together and tried new restaurants and took weekend trips to small towns in upstate New York. Angela taught me to salsa dance at a community center in Queens. I taught her to make the chicken and rice dish my grandmother had passed down to me. Through Angela, I met other women who were reinventing their lives after divorce or widowhood or retirement. A whole community of people who'd reached a point where their old identities no longer fit and were actively creating new ones. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a social circle where I wasn't known primarily as someone's wife or someone's mother. I was just Helen, a woman learning to paint, discovering salsa dancing, exploring new parts of the city, figuring out what made her happy. 6 months after the wedding, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I quit my job at Metropolitan Insurance. Not impulsively. I'd been saving money aggressively since the divorce, living on a strict budget and building up an emergency fund. I'd also been researching alternative careers that would allow me to use the organizational and people skills I'd developed during 25 years in insurance, but in more meaningful work. I found a part-time position with a nonprofit organization that helped seniors navigate Medicare and social services. The pay was less than half what I'd been making at Metropolitan, but it was enough to cover my basic expenses. And the work felt important in ways that processing insurance claims never had. My new job involved visiting seniors in their homes, helping them understand their benefits options, assisting with paperwork, and sometimes just listening to people who were feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of aging in America. Many of my clients were women like me, widowed or divorced, living alone, trying to figure out how to maintain their independence and dignity while dealing with health problems and financial limitations. Working with them reminded me that my challenges, while painful, weren't unique. Many people were navigating similar transitions and finding ways to not just survive but thrive. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, became one of my unofficial mentors in this new phase of life. She'd been living alone for 15 years since her husband died, and she'd created a rich, meaningful existence filled with volunteer work, book clubs, travel, and close friendships. The secret, she told me one afternoon over tea, is to stop waiting for someone else to make your life interesting. You have to take responsibility for your own happiness. But don't you get lonely? Of course I get lonely sometimes. But I also get lonely when I'm with people who don't really see me or appreciate me. The loneliness of being alone is different from the loneliness of being with the wrong people. That distinction became important as I moved further away from the life I'd shared with David and Maria. I missed having constant companionship, missed having someone to share daily experiences with. But I didn't miss the feeling of being taken for granted or unappreciated that had characterized the last few years of my marriage. The loneliness of building a new life was temporary and productive. The loneliness of staying in relationships where I wasn't valued would have been permanent and destructive. A year after the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from Maria. "Helen? It's Maria." I was surprised to hear from her. We hadn't spoken since the wedding, and I'd assumed our relationship was permanently over. "Hi, Maria. I know this is probably strange, me calling you. But I wanted to check in and see how you're doing." "I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I heard from someone that you left MetLife and started working with seniors. Metropolitan Insurance. But yes, I made a career change." "That's wonderful. It sounds like something you'd be good at." We talked for a few minutes about superficial things, the weather, changes in the neighborhood, her mother's health. But there was an underlying awkwardness that made the conversation feel like work. "Helen," she said finally, "I want you to know that I think about you often. I hope you've been able to find some happiness." "I have," I said. "I really have. I'm glad. I know our friendship is probably over forever, but I needed to know that you were okay." After we hung up, I thought about that conversation for days. There was something in Maria's voice that sounded like regret, maybe even guilt. Part of me wondered if her marriage to David was as happy as it had appeared to be at the wedding. But I realized I didn't really want to know. Whether Maria was happy or unhappy in her new life wasn't my concern anymore. She'd made choices that excluded me from her life, and I'd made choices that excluded her from mine. We were both living with the consequences of those decisions. A few months later, I made another major change. I moved out of the apartment David and I had shared for 15 years. Not because I couldn't afford it or because I was unhappy there, but because I was ready for a space that belonged entirely to my new life. The apartment held too many memories of who I used to be. I wanted a place where every room could be decorated according to my own taste, where I could paint in natural light, where I could host my new friends without ghosts of old relationships hovering in the background. I found a smaller apartment in Park Slope, just a few blocks away but in a building I'd never shared with David. It had hardwood floors and large windows and a small balcony where I could drink coffee in the morning sun. Moving day was both emotional and liberating. Packing up 15 years of accumulated possessions meant deciding what parts of my old life were worth carrying forward and what could be left behind. I kept the furniture that was practical and beautiful. I kept photographs of my daughters and meaningful moments with family. I kept books I'd loved and artwork that made me happy. I donated or threw away everything that reminded me of David and Maria. Wedding photos, couple vacation souvenirs, gifts they'd given me over the years. I didn't want to carry resentment into my new life, but I also didn't want to be surrounded by reminders of relationships that had ended painfully. It took me months to fully decorate the new apartment, and I enjoyed every moment of the process. Choosing paint colors without consulting anyone else. Buying furniture that reflected my personal style instead of compromising with a spouse's preferences. Creating an art studio in the spare bedroom where I could paint whenever inspiration struck. For the first time in my adult life, I lived in a space that was completely my own. 2 years after the wedding, I was a different person than the woman who'd sat in that church watching her ex-husband marry her former best friend. I was still working part-time with the Senior Services nonprofit, and I'd been promoted to a supervisory role that involved training new staff and developing programs. The work was challenging and meaningful, and I looked forward to going to the office most days. I was still taking art classes, and I'd started selling some of my paintings at local craft fairs and coffee shops. I wasn't making much money from my art, but seeing strangers respond to something I'd created was deeply satisfying. I was still friends with Angela, and we'd expanded our social circle to include several other women who were navigating life transitions. We had a regular dinner club that met twice a month, trying new restaurants and talking about everything from politics to grandchildren to travel plans. I was dating occasionally, nothing serious, but enjoyable companionship with men I met through various activities. I'd learned that I could enjoy someone's company without needing to build a life with them, and that revelation was surprisingly freeing. Most importantly, I'd developed a relationship with myself that was stronger and more honest than any relationship I'd had with another person. I knew what I liked and what I didn't like. I knew what I was good at and what I wanted to improve. I knew what made me happy and what drained my energy. I'd learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, and that being with people who didn't appreciate me was worse than being alone. But the real test of my transformation came on a Tuesday evening in March, almost exactly 3 years after I'd first discovered David's text messages. I was walking home from art class, carrying a canvas I'd just finished, a portrait of Mrs. Henderson that I'd painted from memory, when I saw them. David and Maria, walking out of a restaurant just a few blocks from my new apartment. They didn't see me at first. They were walking slowly, not talking, and there was something heavy in their body language that suggested tension rather than romance. Maria looked older than she had at the wedding. Not just the natural aging of 2 years, but tired in ways that added years to her appearance. David looked older too, and somehow smaller than I remembered. They looked like a couple going through difficulties. The kind of couple you might see in a therapist's waiting room or having a serious conversation over dinner about whether their relationship was working. For a moment, I felt a flash of satisfaction. Maybe their great love affair wasn't as perfect as it had seemed. Maybe they were learning that relationships built on betrayal of other people carried their own complications. But the satisfaction passed quickly, replaced by something closer to pity. Not pity for their relationship problems, but pity for the people they'd chosen to become. People who'd sacrificed integrity and loyalty for temporary happiness. People who would always know that their love story began with lies and broken promises. They saw me as I was walking past them. Maria's face went pale, and David stopped walking entirely. "Helen," Maria said. "Hi," I replied, not slowing down. "You look..." David started, then seemed unsure how to finish the sentence. "You look good," Maria said. "Happy." "I am happy," I said. "I hope you both are too." I kept walking, not because I was angry or trying to snub them, but because I genuinely had nothing else to say to them. They belonged to a part of my life that was finished. Seeing them didn't hurt anymore because they were no longer important enough in my present life to cause me pain. That night, I called Mrs. Henderson and told her about the encounter. "How did it feel?" she asked. "Like seeing strangers who happened to look familiar. Like seeing actors from a movie I used to watch but don't think about anymore." "That sounds like healing." "It does, doesn't it?" That's when I knew I'd truly moved on. Not because I'd forgiven David and Maria, forgiveness was still a work in progress, but because their choices no longer defined my understanding of my own worth. They'd taught me, unintentionally, that I was stronger and more resilient than I'd ever imagined. They'd forced me to discover parts of myself that might have remained dormant if I'd stayed in the comfortable routines of my old life. In destroying my marriage and my closest friendship, they'd given me the opportunity to build something better, a relationship with myself based on self-respect rather than external validation. Now, at 67, I wake up every morning in my sunlit apartment in Park Slope, surrounded by paintings I've created and furniture I've chosen and photographs of people who love me for who I am, not for what I can provide them. I make my coffee exactly as strong as I like it. I read books that interest me without worrying about whether anyone else would approve of my choices. I spend time with people who make me laugh and support my dreams and treat me with kindness. I work at a job that feels meaningful, even if it doesn't pay as much as my corporate position did. I pursue art and travel and friendships and experiences that bring me joy. Some evenings, I stand on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over Brooklyn, and I think about the woman I was 3 years ago. The woman who defined herself entirely through her relationships with other people. The woman who was so afraid of being alone that she couldn't recognize when she was being treated poorly. That woman wasn't weak or foolish. She was doing the best she could with the understanding she had at the time. But she didn't know she deserved better than settling for relationships that required her to diminish herself. The woman I am now knows that being loved conditional on my willingness to accept poor treatment isn't being loved at all. The woman I am now knows that my value doesn't depend on anyone else's recognition or appreciation. The woman I am now knows that building a life that reflects my own values and interests is more satisfying than maintaining relationships that require me to be someone other than who I am. I still miss aspects of being married. I miss having someone to share daily experiences with, someone to travel with, someone to make decisions with. But I don't miss the specific marriage I had with David, because that marriage had stopped serving both of us long before either of us admitted it. I still miss aspects of having a best friend like Maria. I miss having someone to call with small pieces of news, someone who knew my history, someone who felt like family. But I don't miss the specific friendship I had with Maria, because that friendship had become contaminated with secrets and lies and betrayal. Instead of trying to recreate versions of those relationships with other people, I've learned to appreciate different kinds of connection. Friendships that are based on shared interests rather than shared history. Romantic relationships that enhance my life without defining it. Family relationships with my daughters that respect my identity as an individual, not just their mother. The gift that David and Maria unknowingly gave me was the opportunity to start over, to consciously choose the kind of person I wanted to be and the kind of life I wanted to live. If they hadn't forced me out of my comfortable routines, I might never have discovered that I was capable of reinventing myself at 64. I might never have learned to paint or developed meaningful friendships with people who shared my interests. I might never have found work that felt like more than just a paycheck. I might have spent the rest of my life in relationships that were familiar but not fulfilling, thinking that enough was all I deserved. Their betrayal, as painful as it was, showed me that I was strong enough to survive being abandoned by the people I'd thought would always be there for me. And if I could survive that, I could survive anything. More than survive, I could thrive. The special gift I brought to their wedding wasn't the envelope of cash, though that gesture was important for my own healing process. The real gift was the realization that their choices said nothing about my worth and everything about their character. The real gift was learning that I didn't need anyone else's permission to build a life that made me happy. The real gift was discovering that the best years of my life could still be ahead of me, even after everything I'd thought was permanent had been taken away. Today, when people ask me about going through divorce in my 60s, I tell them it was simultaneously the most painful and the most liberating experience of my life. Painful because losing a 26-year marriage and a 20-year friendship felt like death. Liberating because those losses forced me to find strength and independence I didn't know I possessed. I wouldn't choose to go through that pain again, but I also wouldn't trade the wisdom and self-knowledge I gained from moving through it. The woman who sat in St. Patrick's Cathedral 3 years ago watching her ex-husband marry her former best friend was brave for showing up, but she was still partially defined by their choices and their opinion of her. The woman I am today is defined by my own choices and my own opinion of myself. And that woman likes what she sees when she looks in the mirror. Have you ever been forced to reinvent yourself after losing relationships you thought would last forever? Have you discovered that people you trusted were capable of betraying that trust in ways you never imagined? Have you learned that you were stronger than you knew, that you could build a meaningful life even after everything felt destroyed? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me continue sharing the kinds of honest, complicated stories that we all carry but don't always feel safe telling. Together, we can remind each other that it's never too late to start over, never too late to choose ourselves, and never too late to discover that our best chapters might still be unwritten.